Black Spire Market was the kind of place people pretended didn't exist, even though everyone in the realm benefited from it. It lived beneath the fortress city like a wound that never closed, lit by soot-stained lanterns and guarded by men who smiled too easily. The air smelled of rusted iron, damp stone, and fear disguised as trade. When the vampire king arrived, the crowd did not cheer. They moved out of his path, the way shadows move from fire. King Darius Nocturne wore a travel cloak of deep midnight, the royal crest hidden under plain cloth, but nothing could hide what he was. He carried authority the way other men carried weapons, quiet, heavy, and ready. On either side of him walked his daughters, Lyra and Elawan, small in their violet cloaks, but with eyes that looked too old for their ages. Lyra, 9, watched everything without blinking. Elawan, 7, held her father's sleeve, like she could anchor him back to softness. Darius had brought them here for one reason he could barely admit. The palace had become too silent without a mother's warmth, and his daughters were growing up in halls that echoed with absence. After the blood war ended, he had rebuilt borders and laws, strengthened alliances, and taught his children discipline. But discipline could not kiss nightmares away. Discipline could not replace the gentle voice that used to call them, "My brave girls." The council had suggested a caretaker, a governess, a guardian for the girls' private world. The council had also reminded him with cold practicality that captive markets were legal under the Treaty of Ashfall. Better than execution, they said. Better than uncontrolled revenge. Darius had signed those laws with hands that didn't shake, because a king could not afford shaking. Still, walking through this market with his daughters beside him, he felt every chain rattle like an accusation against his own crown. A thick-necked magistrate named Karst approached with theatrical pride, rings glittering on every finger. "Your Majesty," he said, spreading his arms as if presenting a feast. "An honor beyond words. I have curated options worthy of your court-educated, trained, obedient. You will find exactly what you need." Darius's jaw tightened. Obedient. That word had become too comfortable in too many mouths. "Show me those suited for court service," Darius said, voice low. "Those who can read, write, care for children, and understand respect." Karst clapped twice, and a line of captives was marched forward from behind iron bars. Placards hung around their necks. Wrist restraints gleamed under torchlight. Some held their heads high to hide terror. Some stared at the ground to hide shame. Darius studied them as if searching for a particular kind of soul-patient, steady, gentle. The first was a vampire woman with polished posture. Her placard reading, "Former scribe." She looked dignified until Elawan stepped closer. Then the woman's mouth tightened in a way that wasn't fear, but contempt. The old prejudice of bloodlines that still poisoned peace. Darius moved on. Next was a human man with trembling hands and frightened eyes. He flinched at every shout, every clang of chain. Lyra leaned toward her father and murmured, "He is more scared than we are." She said it without cruelty, only disappointment. Then came a lichen woman who smiled warmly at the children, her eyes shiny with grief. "I have cubs," she confessed, voice cracking. "They were sold separately when my pack fell. I cannot raise another's children while mine are lost." Darius's throat tightened. He turned to Karst. "Release her. Full pardon. Papers, funds. Let her search for them." Karst's smile twitched, but he obeyed. Darius freed 2 more that day, an elder too frail for labor, a war medic with untreated wounds, until he felt his original purpose slipping. Mercy was right, but mercy also had limits in a world built on legal cruelty. Elawan tugged his sleeve gently. "Father," she whispered, "helping them is good, but we came for us too." Darius crouched, smoothing her silver-dark hair. "Sweetheart, I cannot bend every law," he said softly. I must choose carefully. Lyra's gaze remained sharp, fixed on the market's edges rather than the line of good candidates. Maybe we don't need perfect, she said. Maybe we need someone who needs us too. Karst, irritated that the king's compassion was ruining profit, cleared his throat and gestured toward a darker corner under sagging canvas. There is one more, he said, voice lowering as if he enjoyed the drama. But she is problematic, violent, uncooperative. I keep her only because she is strong enough for labor. Details no one else survives. I was considering the arena pits. At least there, she would be profitable entertainment. The cage door scraped open, and guards dragged a chained girl into torchlight. She was restrained at wrists and ankles, and an iron collar hugged her throat with cruel precision. Silver-laced bindings were woven through the chains, meant to burn vampire skin and weaken strength. Yet she did not whimper. She did not plead. She held herself like someone refusing to be turned into a spectacle. Her hair fell in tangled auburn waves, messy from neglect, and her skin was pale as moonlight, marked with old scars, silent sentences carved by years. But it was her eyes that hit Darius hardest, storm gray, fierce, unbroken. It looked like the sky before a violent sea. Karst spoke casually, as if describing livestock. She killed 2 overseers. Refuses work. Refuses submission. No one can break her spirit. She is worthless except as a curiosity. Darius felt something tilt inside his chest, something he had sealed behind duty. How did she come to be here? He asked, and his own voice sounded rough, unfamiliar. War captive, Karst replied. Taken during the siege of Thorn Hollow. Through 4 markets already. 12 years, if the papers are correct. 12 years. The number echoed like a bell in Darius's bones. He should have stepped away. Bringing a dangerous captive into his home, near his daughters, was madness. But before he could command them back, Lyra and Elawan slipped free and walked toward the girl. Guards tensed. The crowd inhaled sharply. Karst shouted a warning. The chained girl's posture shifted, protective despite herself, angling her body as if to shield the children from others, even while she was bound. Elawan reached out, tiny fingers brushing the girl's chained hand. You're very strong, she said softly, as if strength was something beautiful. Why are you so sad? For a heartbeat, the market held its breath. Then the girl's fierce mask cracked. Her throat worked like she was swallowing a scream. Her eyes filled with tears she seemed to hate. I had daughters once, she whispered, voice hoarse from disuse. About your age. I don't know where they are. I don't know if they lived. Lyra's face tightened with a certainty far beyond 9 years. Elawan turned toward her father, eyes shining. They looked at Darius together, as if the answer was obvious, and the world had simply been slow to learn it. That one is ours, they said in unison, pointing at the chained girl. Darius Nocturne, the vampire king who had commanded armies and rewritten laws, stopped breathing. Not because he feared the girl, but because he recognized something in her that should not exist. The tilt of her chin, the scar at her temple, the way she squared her shoulders even in chains, refusing to bow. It felt like a ghost had stepped out of war's ashes and into torchlight. And as the chained girl lifted her head fully and met his eyes, storm gray locked onto midnight black, Darius felt a terrible thought crash through him with the force of truth. If she was alive, then the story he had lived for 12 years had been built on a lie. Asterisk, and in that market of chains, the vampire king realized the most dangerous thing of all wasn't her strength, it was what her survival meant for his heart. His daughters, and the kingdom he thought he had saved. Asterisk, the papers were signed faster than the chains were removed, as if the market itself wanted the problem to disappear before anyone could think too hard about it. Magistrate Karst smiled the whole time, but his eyes stayed sharp and watchful, like he was waiting for something to go wrong. "You will find," he said smoothly, "that this one comes with complications." King Darius Nocturne did not look up from the document as he pressed his seal into the wax. "So does every truth worth facing," he replied. When he straightened, his gaze went to the guards. "Remove the collar. And the restraints. Now." Karst's smile wavered. "Your Majesty, the contract allows." Darius lifted his eyes, and the temperature of the space seemed to drop. "Now," he repeated softly. The guards did not hesitate. The iron collar was unlocked with a harsh click, and when it fell away, the chained girl sucked in a sharp breath, like someone who had been holding it for years. The silver-laced bindings were loosened next. She did not thank anyone. She did not bow. She stood very still, shoulders tight, as if waiting for the next trick. Freedom, to her, looked like another kind of trap. Lyra and Elawan stayed close, one on each side of her, as if she might vanish if they let go. Darius noticed how the girl kept positioning herself slightly in front of them, even now, even exhausted, even unsure. It was not fear. It was instinct. The ride back to the palace passed in heavy silence. The carriage rolled over stone roads, and the city slowly changed from soot and shadows to pale towers and clean banners. The girl sat stiffly across from Darius, hands folded in her lap like she was still chained. Every time the carriage jolted, her muscles tensed, ready for impact. Elawan offered her a small sweet from a pouch. The girl stared at it like it might explode. "It's not a trick," Elawan said earnestly. "I always share." After a moment, the girl took it awkwardly and nodded once. "Thank you," she said, and her voice sounded like it hadn't been used for kindness in a long time. Lyra watched her carefully, then asked, "What is your name?" The girl hesitated. Names had power. Names could be taken, used, erased. "Myra," she said at last. It was not a lie, but it was not the whole truth either. Darius felt something tighten in his chest, but he said nothing. As the palace gates came into view, Myra's eyes lifted to the white stone towers, and something like disbelief crossed her face. She whispered a single word under her breath, so soft that only Darius heard it, in a language he had not heard since before the war, a language that belonged to a woman he had buried home. His fingers tightened around the armrest. He told himself it was coincidence. Grief makes patterns where there are none. Inside the palace, servants lined the halls, trying not to stare. Word had traveled faster than the carriage. A dangerous captive in the royal home was better than any gossip. Mira walked as if expecting the floor to open beneath her. When a servant approached with a tray of clean clothes, he hesitated and placed it on a table instead of handing it to her, as if afraid of touching her hands. Mira noticed. She always noticed. She said nothing. Darius assigned her rooms in the eastern wing, close to the children's quarters, but with guards posted at a respectful distance. "Not to watch you," he said, meeting her eyes. "To watch anyone who might try something foolish." She studied him like she was weighing whether to believe him. "You bought me," she said flatly. "People don't buy things to protect them. They buy them to use them." Darius did not deny it. "I did not bring you here to be used," he said. "But trust is not something I can demand. It must be built." Myra looked away. "Then don't expect it quickly." That night, the palace was quieter than usual. The halls always felt larger after dark, like echoes grew their own shadows. Myra did not sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, back to the wall, listening to every sound. In the early hours, a soft cry drifted through the corridor. Not a scream. A child's nightmare. Before she could think, Myra was on her feet. She followed the sound to the children's room and found Eliawen trembling, eyes wet, whispering a name she barely remembered. Lyra sat up, trying to be brave and failing. Myra hesitated at the door. Then she stepped in. "It's all right," she said, and her voice surprised even herself with its gentleness. She sat beside Eliawen and brushed hair from her face, just once, careful, like touching glass. "Breathe with me," she said. She began to hum, low and soft, a melody older than the palace, older than the war. The girl's breathing slowly matched hers. When Darius arrived, alerted by guards, he stopped in the doorway. He did not interrupt. He listened. He knew that melody. He had heard it once, in another life, when a woman had promised him that strength did not mean the absence of tenderness. The sight before him, his daughters asleep against Mira's shoulders, felt like a memory trying to rewrite itself. The next morning, the court did not hide its discomfort. Whispers followed Myra through the halls like cold air. At breakfast, a noblewoman accidentally spilled tea near her feet and laughed too quickly. "Careful," she said sweetly. "We wouldn't want our guest to get upset." Myra stood, knelt, and cleaned it without a word. The room waited for her to explode. She did not. She finished, rose, and returned to her seat. Lyra's hands curled into fists. Eliawen's eyes filled with quiet anger. Darius felt something shift behind his ribs, something old and dangerous. He looked at the noblewoman and said calmly, "In my house, guests are treated with respect. If you find that difficult, you may dine elsewhere." The smile vanished from her face. Later, in a side corridor, a scholar approached Darius with a scroll he had found in old war records. "Your Majesty," he said, uncertain, "there is a sealed transfer list from Thorn Hollow. One name is marked as unconfirmed." Darius's heart missed a beat. He took the scroll with hands that did not quite feel like his own. Across the hall, Myra paused, as if she had felt something move in the air. She looked back at him, eyes searching, guarded, and full of something that looked dangerously like hope. And for the first time, the vampire king allowed himself to think the thought he had been running from since the market, that he had not just brought a stranger into his home, but a truth that could break the past open and force the future to become something else. And as the palace settled into uneasy silence, both of them lay awake in different wings of the same castle, knowing that freedom had only been the first chain to fall. Asterisk by the third day, the palace had learned how to smile politely at Mira while sharpening its knives in private. The eastern wing felt warmer with the children's laughter, but the rest of the court watched her like a crack in perfect glass. Servants whispered. Nobles observed. Guards pretended not to listen. Mira noticed everything and trusted nothing. She moved carefully, never standing in the middle of a room, never turning her back to a doorway. Old habits did not die. They simply learned new shapes. Lyra and Eliawen followed her like curious shadows, asking questions about scars and songs, and whether the stars looked different beyond the mountains. Myra answered what she could and deflected what she couldn't. When Eliawen asked, "Did you really fight in the war?" Mira only said, "I survived it." Darius watched these small exchanges from a distance, telling himself he was only being careful, only being responsible. Yet every time Mira placed herself slightly between the girls and a stranger, something inside him tightened with a familiarity he did not want to name. The court's first open test came dressed as a welcome luncheon. Long tables gleamed with silver and crystal, and every smile was perfectly measured. Darius took his seat at the head, the girls beside him, and after a pause that felt intentional, he gestured for Myra to sit at a small table near them, not on the floor, not hidden away. The room noticed. A murmur rippled like wind across water. A noble named Lord Varick, famous for turning cruelty into entertainment, lifted his cup and said lightly, "Your Majesty is very progressive, allowing a former captive so close to the royal children. Are we certain this is wise?" The word former was said like it did not quite belong. Darius met his gaze. "In my house, people are not their past," he said. "They are their actions." Varick smiled. "Then perhaps we should see her actions." It happened quickly, but not by accident. A servant carrying a heavy tray passed too close, stumbled, and spilled a bowl of dark sauce across the floor near Myra's feet. The splash reached the hem of her simple dress. The servant froze, eyes darting to Varick. "I'm so sorry," he said, but his voice held no fear, only calculation. Varick leaned back, amused. "Well," he said, "she was trained for labor, wasn't she? It would be a shame to let her forget her skills." A few nobles chuckled. The room waited. This was the moment they wanted. The moment the dangerous one would prove them right. Myra's jaw tightened. She felt the old rage stir, hot and familiar. She could see the paths this could take, the punishment, the chains returning in different forms. She inhaled, slowly, and knelt. She cleaned the floor in silence, hands steady, back straight. When she finished, she returned to her seat and looked at no one. Lyra's face burned with anger. Eloan's eyes filled with tears. Darius felt something cold and precise settle into his bones. He did not shout. He did not stand. He set down his cup and said, very calmly, "Lord Varick, you seem to misunderstand the difference between service and humiliation." Varick raised an eyebrow. "I was merely suggesting she contribute." Darius's voice did not rise. "You were suggesting she be reminded of a cage. That will not happen in my presence." The room went quiet. Varick's smile thinned. "Your Majesty is very protective of a stranger." Darius looked at Myra, then back at Varick. "I am protective of what is right," he said, "and of my daughter's understanding of it." He turned to the servant. "You will apologize, and you will clean the rest of the floor. And then you will consider whether you wish to keep working in a house where people are not used as lessons." The servant went pale and nodded quickly. The nobles shifted. The balance of the room had changed. Later that afternoon, Lyra found Mira in the eastern garden, standing very still in front of a dry fountain. "You didn't have to do that," Lyra said, meaning the kneeling, the silence. Myra looked at the cracked stone basin. "Yes, I did," she replied. "Not because they deserved it. Because you did. You should not learn that power means hurting someone who cannot fight back." Lyra studied her, then nodded slowly, as if storing the lesson away for later. Eloan ran up and hugged Mira without warning. Myra froze and carefully placed a hand on the child's back, as if remembering how. That evening, Darius received the scholar again. The sealed transfer list lay open between them. One name was blurred by age and deliberate ink. "Records from Thorn Hollow are incomplete," the scholar said. "Many captives were reclassified. Some were erased." Darius's eyes stayed on the page. 12 years. The number would not leave him. He dismissed the scholar and sat alone for a long time, listening to the palace breathe. He told himself not to see patterns. He told himself not to reopen graves. Trouble did not wait for his caution. 2 nights later, a fire broke out in a storage wing near Myra's rooms. It was small, controlled quickly, but the message was clear. Someone wanted fear. Someone wanted to remind her she did not belong. Guards reported a broken lantern, placed too carefully to be an accident. When Darius went to check on Myra, he found her already awake, sitting with her back to the wall, eyes sharp. "They are testing how far they can go," she said quietly. "They always do." Darius surprised himself by sitting on the chair across from her instead of standing like a king. "They will not go farther," he said. "Not in my house." She looked at him for a long moment. "Houses don't change," she said. "People do, sometimes." The next morning, the court gathered again, buzzing with rumors. Varric stood with a group of supporters, whispering about safety and risk. Darius entered with Lyra and Elawan, and for the first time, Mira walked beside them, not behind. The whispers grew louder. Varric stepped forward. "Your Majesty," he said, "after last night's incident, perhaps it is time to reconsider certain experiments." Darius did not let him finish. "Last night's incident was an attack," he said, "and I will treat it as such. Anyone found responsible will be punished, not because a captive was targeted, but because a person was." He looked around the room. "Let me be clear. Mira is under my protection. Anyone who forgets that will learn what it means to challenge my word." The room fell silent. Mira felt something unfamiliar and dangerous in her chest. Not safety. Not yet. But the beginning of it. She did not look at Darius, because if she did, she was afraid she might start to believe in something that had already broken her once asterisk. The palace at night felt like a different world, one built from echoes and memories instead of stone. When the halls emptied and the torches burned low, even the most confident rooms seemed to hold their breath. Mira had learned long ago that darkness was not always the enemy, but silence often was. She could not sleep. The fire incident had not frightened her, not in the way her enemies probably hoped, but it had reminded her that safety was always temporary, something that had to be earned again every day. She walked quietly through the eastern wing, barefoot on cold marble, moving like someone who did not want to wake the past. A corridor she had not noticed before opened into an older part of the palace, one that servants rarely cleaned and courtiers rarely visited. The air there felt heavier, thick with old sorrow. At the end of the hall stood a row of tall, covered portraits. Myra stopped in front of one, without knowing why. Her hand lifted, trembling slightly, and rested on the dark cloth. Something in her chest tightened, sharp and deep, like a wound remembering itself. Behind her, far across the palace, Lyra and Elawan woke at the same time from the same bad dream. They did not scream. They whispered a name they barely remembered, a name that felt like warmth and loss mixed together. The guards outside their door did not notice at first. Mira did. She turned and walked back the way she came, faster now, heart beating harder. When she reached their room, she found Elawan sitting up, shaking, and Lyra trying to be brave but failing. "It was the fire again," Elawan whispered. But this time no one came. Myra sat on the edge of the bed without thinking and pulled both girls gently toward her. "You're safe," she said, and the words were not a promise. They were a decision. She began to hum, low and steady, the same melody she had used before, the one that seemed to quiet storms inside small hearts. The girls' breathing slowed. Their hands clutched her sleeves like anchors. When Darius arrived, summoned by a guard who had finally noticed the light, he stopped in the doorway. He saw his daughters asleep against Myra's shoulders and felt something twist in his chest that no armor could stop. He did not speak. He listened to the song. He knew it. He had heard it once, long ago, when a woman with silver-streaked hair had sung to their daughters during a thunderstorm and said, "Even the sky needs to cry sometimes." Darius stepped back without waking them. He told himself it was coincidence. He told himself grief was a liar dot the next day. He could not stop noticing small things. The way Myra corrected Eloan's grip on a practice dagger, not to make her dangerous, but to make her confident. The way Lyra listened to Myra's stories, not of war, but of traveling stars and stubborn flowers that grew between stones. the way Myra always sat where she could see every door. In the afternoon, a healer collapsed in the western wing from exhaustion. Before anyone else reacted, Mira was there, applying pressure to stop the bleeding from a torn hand, giving calm, clear instructions like she had done it 1,000 times. "Where did you learn that?" the healer asked later. Mira only said, "On roads that don't exist anymore." That evening, a storm rolled in, heavy and sudden. The wind howled through high windows, and thunder shook the older parts of the palace. The daughters ran to Myra's rooms without asking permission. They had started doing that. Myra did not send them away. She sat with them, told them a story about a mountain that thought it was alone until it learned it was holding up the sky. Halfway through, Ilawan asked, very softly, "Do you think our mother is lonely?" The question fell like a dropped cup. Myra's breath caught. She looked at Lyra, then at Ilawan, and chose her words carefully. "I think," she said, "that if she is, she would still be proud of you." The girls nodded, as if that was enough for now. Later, Darius stood alone in the gallery of old portraits. The storm made the torches flicker, throwing shadows across faces that had ruled and failed and been forgotten. He stopped in front of the same covered painting Mira had touched the night before. He reached out and pulled the cloth away. The woman beneath it looked out with familiar eyes and a defiant smile. Queen Selene Nocturne, his wife, his heart, his loss. The scar at the temple, the tilt of the chin. Darius's hands began to shake. "No," he whispered to the empty room. "You died?" The words did not sound convincing, even to him. He returned the cloth and left, heart heavy. In the archives, he found the scholar again and demanded more records from Thorn Hollow. What he found was not proof, but it was absence. And absence can be louder than any confession. Names missing. Dates altered. Transfers unaccounted for. A kingdom built during a war did not like to remember its mistakes. That night, Mira dreamed of fire and falling stone, and hands that could not reach each other. She woke before dawn, breath short, and sat by the window. The sky was pale. For a moment, she let herself imagine that this place could be more than a stop on a long road of cages. Then she shook the thought away. Hope was dangerous. The next day, a minor noble confronted her in a side corridor, smiling too kindly. "You've made quite an impression," he said. "Some of us wonder what you are really doing here." Mira met his gaze without flinching. "Trying to survive," she said. "Like everyone else." He laughed softly. "Careful. Survival is not always appreciated." That evening, Darius announced a formal investigation into the fire and the market contracts. The court reacted like he had declared a quiet war. Late that night, Darius walked past the children's rooms and heard the humming again. He stopped. He did not go in. He simply stood there, listening, and for the first time in 12 years, he allowed himself to think the unthinkable, that the dead sometimes do not stay where kingdoms put them, and that the truth does not care how much it costs to be told. And as thunder rolled over the palace, both king and captive stood awake in different shadows, feeling the same impossible thought begin to take shape. Asterisk. By the 5th week, the palace no longer felt like a single place. It felt like two worlds forced to share the same walls. In one world, Lyra and Ilawan laughed more than they had in years, ran through gardens with Myra, and argued over which stars were the bravest. In the other, nobles whispered, servants chose sides, and old power structures tightened like a net. Darius felt the tension in every council meeting, in every carefully polite bow that carried a hidden question. The investigation into the market and the fire had already revealed uncomfortable things: missing funds, altered contracts, names that did not match records. Someone was afraid. Afraid people rarely stayed quiet. Myra knew it too. Fear had a sound. She heard it in footsteps that stopped when she turned around, in doors that closed a little too quickly, in the way certain servants avoided her eyes. Still, she did not hide. She continued her quiet routines, walking the children to lessons, helping Elawan with reading, listening to Lyra's careful questions about duty and choice. One afternoon, while the girls were in the library, Mira went alone to return a book. The corridor was empty, too empty. She felt it before she saw it. The air changed. A door behind her closed softly. 3 figures stepped out of a side passage. They were not nobles. They were not guards. They were hired men, the kind that did not ask many questions. "You're causing trouble," one of them said, not unkindly, like he was discussing weather. Some people would like that to stop. Myra's hands relaxed at her sides. "Tell them to ask me themselves," she said. The second man laughed. "This is the asking." They did not draw blades. They did not need to. One lunged. Myra moved. Years of survival took over. She did not strike to kill. She struck to escape. She twisted, redirected, dropped one man to the floor with a controlled blow that knocked the breath out of him. The second grabbed her arm. She broke his grip and sent him into the wall. The third hesitated. That was his mistake. The noise brought guards running. The men fled, leaving one groaning on the floor. When Darius arrived, his expression was not anger. It was something colder, something that had made kingdoms fall before. Was anyone else hurt? He asked first. Myra shook her head. They didn't want to fight, she said. They wanted fear. Darius closed his eyes briefly, then turned to the captain of the guard. Double security. Find out who paid them, quietly. The captain nodded. The palace, it seemed, had crossed another line. The rumor reached the court before the truth did. By evening, it had become the dangerous captive attacked 3 men. Varric and his circle did not waste the opportunity. They gathered in the main hall like concerned citizens. "Your Majesty," Varric said, hands folded. "This is exactly what we warned about. Violence follows her. Perhaps it is time to remove the risk before someone innocent is hurt." Lyra stepped forward before Darius could speak. "They attacked her," she said, voice steady but young. "I heard the guards say so." Varric smiled gently, the way people do when they think children are useful tools. "Sweet girl, things are not always so simple." Elawan moved to Myra's side and grabbed her hand. "She didn't hurt anyone who didn't try to hurt her," she said. The room murmured. Darius felt something fierce rise in him, not just for Myra, but for what his daughters were learning to stand against. Before he could answer, Mira did something no one expected. She stepped forward. "They were paid," she said. "I don't know by whom, but they were told to scare me, to make me leave, or make you afraid of me." She looked around the hall, meeting eyes one by one. "If you want me gone, you don't need knives. You can say it." Silence followed. It was not the silence of agreement. It was the silence of being seen. Varric recovered first. "Brave words," he said. "But we must think of the realm." Darius finally spoke. "The realm is not protected by cowards who hire shadows," he said. "It is protected by law and by truth. And the truth is that someone here tried to use violence to manipulate my decisions." His gaze swept the room. "That will not end well for them." The investigation moved faster after that. Coins were traced. Orders were followed backward like footprints in snow. Within days, a minor noble house was exposed, one that had lost contracts when the market system came under scrutiny. They had paid for the attack. Publicly, they claimed ignorance. Privately, they were stripped of influence and placed under watch. The court learned the lesson. The king was not bluffing. Mira expected satisfaction. She felt none. That night, she sat alone in the garden, staring at the dark fountain. Darius found her there. He did not stand like a ruler. He sat on the cold stone bench beside her. "You could have killed them," he said. "You chose not to." Myra shrugged. "Dead enemies don't learn. And I am tired of being what people expect me to be." Darius studied her profile. "You defended even the ones who tried to use you as an excuse," he said. "Why?" Myra was quiet for a long moment. "Because if I let this place turn me into what the market tried to make me," she said, "then they still own something." The next day, the daughters found her helping a servant who had twisted her ankle. Lyra watched and said, "You're always helping people who don't help you back." Myra smiled faintly. "That's how you remind the world who you are." Darius heard that later, from Lyra, and it stayed with him longer than any council speech. That evening, a formal announcement was made. The first captive contracts were being reviewed for release or reform. It was not the end of the system, but it was the first crack in it. The palace reacted with shock, then argument, then quiet realization. Things were changing. Myra stood on a balcony that night, looking out at the city. Darius joined her, not touching, not crowding. "You don't have to stay," he said. "Not because of fear, not because of politics. If you choose to leave, I will make sure you can." Myra did not answer right away. "I have been running for 12 years, she said. "I don't know how to stop." Darius nodded. "Then don't stop," he said. "Just don't run alone." And as the city slept under uneasy stars, both of them understood that something in the world had shifted, and it would never fit back into its old cruel shape. The truth did not arrive like a thunderclap. It came like a quiet blade sliding between ribs. Darius found it in a sealed archive box that had been misfiled under post-war logistics. A single transfer record, burned at the edges, with a name that had been scratched out and rewritten twice. The dates matched. The location matched. The classification read, "High-value war captive, identity suppressed." His hands did not shake as he read it. That came later. First came the cold, perfect clarity that told him the kingdom he had built on certainty had been standing on a buried lie. He closed the box, dismissed the scholar without explanation, and walked through the palace as if every corridor were suddenly narrower. 12 years. He had lived 12 years, believing he had buried a wife and raised 2 daughters alone. 12 years while someone he loved had been sold, traded, chained, and erased by paperwork. He did not go to Myra immediately. He went to the children's rooms. Lyra was reading. Elawan was asleep, clutching a small wooden star Mira had carved for her. Darius sat between the beds and listened to the palace breathe. "If something I believed was wrong," he asked Lyra quietly, "would you want to know?" Lyra looked up at him with the same steady eyes that had chosen a chained girl in a market. "Yes," she said. "If it's true, it's already there. Not knowing just makes it heavier." He kissed her forehead and left before she could ask more. Myra was in the eastern garden, tending a stubborn vine that refused to grow where it was planted. Darius stopped a few steps away and said her name. She turned, and for a moment the world narrowed to the space between them. He did not speak like a king. He spoke like a man who had been holding his breath for years. "Your name is not Myra," he said. It was not an accusation. It was an opening. She did not deny it. Her shoulders lifted and fell once. "It is the name I used to survive," she said. "Names are dangerous." He nodded. "So is the truth," he said. Then he told her what he had found. She did not cry. She did not shout. She sat down on the stone edge of the fountain and stared at the water as if it might answer something. "I thought," she said slowly, that if I ever stood in front of you again, I would hate you." She looked up. "I tried. I really tried." Darius took a step closer, then stopped, as if unsure he was allowed. "You should," he said. "I declared you dead. I let the world move on. I let our daughters grow up with a story that protected a kingdom and destroyed a family." Her jaw tightened. "You didn't put me in chains," she said, "but you signed the laws that kept them on. The words were not cruel. They were accurate." He accepted them like a verdict. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she spoke again. "I stayed alive for 2 reasons," she said. "Stubbornness, and the idea that my daughters might still be breathing somewhere. I told myself I would find them, or die trying." Darius closed his eyes. "They are here," he said. "They chose you before either of us was brave enough to speak." A sound escaped her that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. "They have your eyes," she said. "I knew, but I didn't let myself know. The palace did not keep secrets well. By morning, whispers had become wind." Darius did not wait for the council to gather. He called them. He stood before them without ceremony and said, "The captive market is suspended. All contracts are under royal review. Any official who altered identities, erased names, or profited from unlawful transfers will be tried." The hall exploded into argument. He led it, then he raised one hand, and the room remembered who he was. "This is not mercy," he said. "It is correction. Varric tried one last time. Your Majesty, you are letting personal matters endanger stability." Darius looked at him and felt nothing but distance. "Stability built on buried people is not stability," he said. "It is a delayed collapse." Orders followed. Arrests followed. The machine that had turned suffering into paperwork began, at last, to run in reverse. That afternoon, Lyra and Elawan were brought to the garden. They knew something was different. Children always do. Mira stood, hands trembling for the first time since the market. Darius did not speak for her. He let her find her own words. She knelt so she was eye level. "I have been gone for a long time," she said. "Not because I wanted to be." Elawan stared, then touched the scar at her temple with the same fearless gentleness she had shown a stranger in chains. "You sing like her," she said. Lyra looked between them, understanding arriving like dawn. "You are her," she said simply. Myra nodded. The girls did not hesitate. They moved into her arms, as if they had been waiting for permission for 12 years. Later, when the palace finally slept, Darius found Mira on the balcony overlooking the city. "I cannot undo what happened," he said, "but I will spend my life making sure it never happens again." She watched the lights below. "I don't need a crown," she said. "I need honesty." He nodded. "Then start with this," he said. "Stay, not as something I own, as someone who chooses." She was quiet, then said, "I will stay. But not because of you. Because of them. And because this world needs fewer cages." In the weeks that followed, people were freed. Systems changed. Not perfectly. Not easily. But truly. Myra walked the halls without guards. Darius listened more than he spoke. The daughters laughed in ways the palace had forgotten. And sometimes, late at night, 2 people who had been broken and different. Ways stood side by side and learned how to be something like whole. And so the kingdom learned what the children had known. From the beginning, that real power is not in chains or crowns, but in the courage to choose kindness and to rebuild what the world tried to bury.